You have been told the opposite of the truth. Push harder, want it more, check the calendar again, look for the sign again, ask one more time why it still hasn't come. We were taught that desire works like a fire. The more air you give it, the bigger it grows. But what if the tightness in your chest when you think about what you want isn't desire at all? What if it's resistance, wearing desire's face so well that you never notice the switch? This video will not tell you to give up on what you want, and it will not promise that everything you want shows up the moment you stop caring. That would be a different kind of lie. What it will show you is smaller and far more honest. The thing you've been chasing may have been moving toward you the whole time, and your own grip has been the only thing keeping it at a distance. By the end, you'll understand why wanting something desperately can quietly push it further away, and what your nervous system actually needs before it lets anything new come close. Let's start with what is actually happening inside your body when you want something badly. Not the spiritual explanation yet, just the plain physical one. You check your phone one more time. You read the situation again, looking for a sign you might have missed. You ask quietly, almost without noticing you're asking, "Why hasn't this happened yet?" None of that is weakness. It's what a body does when it has decided that something is missing and needs to be found, fixed, or forced into place. The mind calls this caring. The body experiences it as an emergency. Here's a picture that might make this easier to see. Imagine a garden hose lying in the grass, and somewhere along its length, there's a kink, a tight twist where the rubber folds in on itself. Water is on. Pressure is building at the spigot, but almost nothing comes out the other end. So what do most people do? They turn the spigot harder. They add more pressure, thinking the problem is a lack of force, but the water was never the problem, and neither was the pressure. The problem was the kink, the one tight place where everything that wants to move is being squeezed shut. This is closer to what tension does to desire than it first looks. The wanting isn't broken. The pressure behind it is not too weak. There's a kink. A place where your body has clenched around the wanting itself, and turning up the intensity at the spigot doesn't open that kink. It just builds more pressure against the same closed point. Sometimes that pressure has to go somewhere, so it shows up as a tight jaw, a racing mind at 2 a.m., a short temper with people who have nothing to do with any of this. If you've spent years trying to manifest a different life, more love, more money, more peace, more room to breathe, you already know this feeling. You've done the gratitude lists. You've said the affirmations in the mirror. You've visualized the version of your life you want in detail more than once. And some part of you still wakes up already bracing, already scanning for what's wrong, already running the old question: when is this finally going to happen? That question feels like longing. It is actually closer to a leak detector running on repeat. And every time it runs, it reports the same finding back to your nervous system. Still not here. Still missing. Still not safe to stop watching. This is the part the popular version leaves out, because it's less exciting than the promise of attracting something new. The truth is quieter than that, and more useful. What you focus on with intensity isn't only the object of your desire, it's also the felt sense of lack underneath it. And your body cannot tell the difference between "I want this so much" and "I don't have this and that is a problem." To your nervous system, both sentences sound exactly the same. Both say, "This is missing." And whatever is treated, moment after moment, as missing, tends to stay one step ahead of you, not because life is punishing you, but because you are rehearsing its absence with more discipline than you are rehearsing its presence. Think about how this shows up outside of anything spiritual. A person who is desperate for connection often comes across as harder to connect with, not because they're unlikable, but because the desperation itself changes their voice, their timing, their eyes. A person checking their bank balance every hour, certain that abundance is coming, is still organizing their entire day around scarcity. The intensity of the want and the presence of the lack are not opposites here. They are sitting in the exact same kink in the hose. So, here's a question worth sitting with for a moment, not to answer quickly, but to actually feel. What if the very intensity you've been calling dedication has actually been the loudest way your body keeps telling itself that this thing is still gone? This isn't a reason to blame yourself, and it isn't proof that you're doing manifestation wrong. Your body learned to hold on tight for reasons that made sense once. We'll come back to exactly where that pattern was built, because it matters. For now, the only thing worth noticing is simpler. Somewhere between wanting something and gripping it, a kink formed. And no amount of additional pressure at the spigot is going to undo a kink. Something else has to happen first. That something is not giving up on what you want. It is something most people have never been taught to do on purpose. And it is exactly where we're headed next. So here's where most people get this wrong, and it's an honest mistake, because the word relax sounds like the word stop. If wanting something with everything you have has been keeping it away, then surely the answer is to want it less, care less, maybe even pretend it doesn't matter. A lot of people try exactly that. They go quiet about their desire. They tell themselves they're detached now, while privately still checking, still hoping, still flinching every time it doesn't show up. That isn't relaxing. That's gripping with a calmer face on. Relaxing and giving up are not the same motion, even though they can look identical from the outside for about 3 seconds. Giving up releases the desire. Relaxing releases the grip on the desire while the wanting stays fully intact. That difference is small to describe and enormous to actually live. Think about what it takes to be a surgeon, not the studying, the training that's a given. Think about the hand, in the moment, holding the scalpel. A surgeon who cares the most about the person on the table, who understands exactly what's at stake, whose hands are responsible for someone's whole future, cannot afford a hand that shakes. Not because the caring is too much, because a shaking hand caused by fear, by urgency, by the sheer weight of how much this matters, will cut in the wrong place. The steadiness in that hand isn't the absence of care. It's what allows the care to actually reach the patient instead of trembling above them, useless. The surgeon who loved the outcome the least would have the steadiest hand of all, and that's exactly the kind of surgeon nobody wants. What you want is someone who cares enormously and has trained their hand to stay loose anyway. That's what relaxing is supposed to do for your desire, not lower how much it matters to you. Steady the hand you're holding it with. There's a fear hiding underneath this, and it deserves to be said out loud instead of skipped past. If I stop gripping this so tightly, won't it disappear? That fear makes sense. If you believe the grip is the only thing keeping your desire close, then loosening your hand feels like watching it fall. But go back to the hose for 1 second. The grip was never moving the water forward. The grip was the kink. Loosening it doesn't drop anything. It's the one thing that lets what you wanted move toward you in the first place. You haven't been holding your desire in place this whole time. You've been holding it shut. Try something small right now, without making it complicated. Notice your jaw. Right now, odds are it's clenched a little without you even knowing. Notice your shoulders, whether they've crept up toward your ears sometime in the last few minutes, the way they do when a body is bracing for news it expects to be bad. Let your jaw unclench just slightly. Let your shoulders drop half an inch. Notice that the thing you want, whatever it is for you right now, did not get further away in that half a second. It's still exactly as present in your mind as it was before you softened. That's the whole proof. Trust isn't a feeling you have to manufacture out of nowhere. It's what's left in the body once the bracing stops being necessary. This is also where relax stops being passive, because passive is its own trap. Relaxing is not the same as doing nothing, staring at the ceiling, and waiting for the universe to rearrange itself around your stillness. It's closer to what that surgeon's hand is doing, present, engaged, capable, ready to move the second movement is needed, but not shaking. You are allowed to keep taking the steps in front of you. You are allowed to keep showing up for the version of your life you're building. What changes is not your involvement. What changes is whether your nervous system is treating every step like an emergency or like something it already trusts is on its way. And that trust has to start somewhere other than the outside world, because the outside world hasn't moved yet. It starts with which state you're standing in before anything has changed. And that's a stranger, more important place than most people ever think to look. A conductor stands in front of an orchestra, baton raised, and for a moment, nothing happens. No sound, no music, just a small, silent gesture, what musicians call the upbeat. It looks like almost nothing. The audience rarely notices it at all. But that single soundless movement decides the tempo, the weight, the entire character of everything that follows. A piece that drags wasn't ruined by the musicians playing too slowly in the middle. It was set up to drag in that first silent beat before a single note existed. If a conductor wanted to fix a sluggish performance, yelling at the cellos halfway through wouldn't help much. The real point of leverage already passed. It happened before the sound did. This is closer to how your life actually works than the usual explanations ever admit. People try to fix their results the way that conductor might try to fix the cellos mid-performance, pushing harder against a circumstance, forcing a conversation, controlling someone else's decision, repeating an affirmation while the rest of the body is still bracing for disappointment. All of that is trying to edit the music after it's already playing. The actual instruction was given earlier, quieter, somewhere almost no one thinks to look. The state you were standing in before anything happened at all. Here's the part worth being precise about, because this is exactly where teaching on this tends to either get vague or get it wrong. Your inner state doesn't reach out into the world and rearrange it like a hand-moving furniture. What it does is closer to something your own nervous system is doing constantly, with no awareness required from you. It decides what gets noticed, what gets approached, what gets tolerated, and what gets walked away from. A mind that has been practicing scarcity for years will notice the one expense that proves there's not enough, and walk right past 3 small signs of things going fine. A mind that has been practicing safety will hear an ambiguous comment from a boss as neutral, while a mind practicing threat will hear the same comment and spend the whole night turning it into evidence of disaster. None of that is mystical. It's closer to what's sometimes described, in research on attention and perception, as the brain's habit of acting less like a camera, recording what's there, and more like a guess about what's most likely to matter, built from whatever it has rehearsed the most. Two people can stand in the exact same room and, depending on which state they've been practicing, walk away having lived in two different rooms entirely. That's not a metaphor. That's closer to a literal description of how attention works. So when people talk about a desired life not showing up yet, it's worth asking a different question than the one usually asked. Not why hasn't this happened, but what is the state I've actually been holding steady underneath all the things I've been saying I want? Some traditions would describe this as the world meeting you halfway, or as resonance, or as a field responding to your frequency. Strip the language down, and something more grounded remains. The opportunities you act on, the people you let close, the risks you're willing to take, the rooms you walk into believing you belong in. All of it gets filtered first through whichever state your body has been rehearsing the longest. That filter changes what reaches you long before anything mystical needs to be involved. This is also why a single good day, one great meditation, one powerful affirmation in the mirror rarely changes very much on its own. The conductor's upbeat isn't a single wave of the baton at the very start and then nothing. It's the tempo held through the whole piece. One steady morning doesn't undo a decade of bracing. What actually moves something is the state you keep returning to, the one you're standing in by default once the effort wears off, the one running quietly underneath your to-do list and your traffic and your unanswered messages, which means the real question was never really about the outcome you've been chasing. It's about which state has been getting rehearsed long enough to become the default, and what that default has already been filtering toward you and filtering out, completely outside your awareness. Once that default state starts running on fear, urgency, or constant checking, there's a very specific thing it does to the thing you want most. It doesn't just fail to attract it, it actively pushes it further out of reach. And the mechanism behind that is worth seeing clearly, because most people are doing it every single day without realizing it. Here is the mechanism, and it's worth seeing clearly because it's one of the easiest things to do without ever noticing. If you've ever been caught in deep mud or wet sand, you may already know the rule that saves people in quicksand, even though it goes against every instinct in the body. Thrashing makes you sink. The panic tells you to fight harder, kick faster, pull against the pull. But every hard kick pushes the surrounding sand into the space beneath you, and that space collapses, and you go down faster than if you'd done nothing at all. The actual way out is almost insulting in its simplicity. Stop struggling, spread your weight out as wide and flat as you can, and let stillness do what force never could. The quicksand was never holding you down with strength. It was using your own struggle as the mechanism. Chasing something with anxiety works on a similar principle, just slower and harder to see, because there's no mud to point to. Every anxious check-in, every has it happened yet, every scroll through the inbox, every retelling of the story to a friend that ends with "I just don't understand why this isn't working," is a small kick against the sand. It feels like effort. It feels like trying. What it's actually doing is reinforcing, with real repetition, the exact state your body is broadcasting. This is missing, this is missing, this is missing. And a body broadcasting missing on a loop isn't in a position to notice the door that's already cracked open 3 feet to the left. This shows up in places that have nothing to do with manifestation as a concept. 2 candidates can want a job equally badly. One walks into the interview having rehearsed the desperation, replaying their bills, their last rejection, what it would mean if this falls through too, and that desperation comes through in the voice without a single word naming it. The other wants the job just as much, but has somehow settled into the interview the way a person settles into a chair they already trust will hold them. Interviewers can feel the difference, even when they can't name what they're feeling. It isn't that the calm candidate cared less. It's that their nervous system wasn't actively performing the missing in real time, which left actual room in their voice, their pacing, their eye contact, for the parts of them that were genuinely good at the job to be visible. This is the part that finally explains something a lot of people in this audience have quietly suspected for years, that the more directly you go after a particular outcome, sometimes the further it seems to slide. It isn't that desire is dangerous. It's that fear-driven pursuit and calm-held pursuit produce 2 completely different states in the body. And those 2 states change what you notice, how you come across, and which opportunities your own attention even registers as real options instead of distractions. Calm doesn't mean you stop moving toward what you want. The candidate who trusted the chair still showed up, still answered every question, still wanted the job. What changed wasn't the wanting. It was whether each step toward it was taken from a place of "this is already steady," or a place of "I need this to work," or "something is wrong with me." One of those states keeps your attention wide enough to see what's actually in front of you. The other narrows everything down to the absence you're trying to fix, which is, ironically, the one thing your attention keeps confirming instead of solving. So the practical shift isn't want less. It's stop confirming the missing every few minutes and start practicing the held. That single change, small, almost boring, nothing like the dramatic leap people expect, is closer to the real engine behind every story you've ever heard about something finally arriving once someone let go. They didn't stop caring. They stopped kicking against the sand. What's still left to understand is where that held, steady state actually does its work. Because it isn't loud and it doesn't announce itself, and most people walk straight past the place where it actually happens. If you've ever made bread from scratch, you already know something almost no one mentions when they talk about manifesting. The most important part of the whole process happens with the lid on. You mix the dough, you knead it, and then you do almost nothing. You cover it with a towel, set it in a warm corner of the kitchen, and walk away. Underneath that towel, something is genuinely happening. Yeast is feeding, gas is forming, the dough is expanding in the dark, completely out of sight. But here's the part that matters. If you lift the towel every 10 minutes to check on it, poke it, see how it's coming along, you don't speed anything up. You let the warmth escape. You let the steady, undisturbed condition collapse over and over, right as it was building toward something. The bread that rises well is almost always the bread that got left alone the longest. This is closer to where manifestation actually happens than the moments people usually point to. The vision board, the affirmation, the moment you finally say the thing out loud, those are the mixing and the kneading. They matter, but they're not where the real movement occurs. The real movement happens in the covered, quiet stretch afterward, where nothing visible is happening and your only job is to not keep lifting the towel. Almost nobody can sit still through that stretch. The not knowing feels like nothing is working, so they go back in. One more search, one more conversation rehashing the situation, one more night spent turning the timeline over in their head. Every time, without meaning to, they let the heat out. Then they look at the flat dough and conclude that surrender doesn't work, when what actually happened is that they never let surrender finish what it was doing. There's a word that gets used a lot around this idea, surrender, and it's worth being precise about what it does and doesn't mean here, because it's one of the most misunderstood words in this entire space. Surrender doesn't mean indifference. The baker who walks away from the dough still cares enormously whether the bread rises. They just understand that their job at this exact stage is to stop interfering with a process that only works when left undisturbed. That's a very different posture than not caring. It's caring enough to know when your hands need to come off. Whatever you want to call the intelligence behind that rising, some traditions would say God, others would say the universe, others would simply call it life, or the way things naturally organize when nothing is choking them. The name matters far less than the behavior underneath it. Whatever that intelligence is, it doesn't appear to do its best work while being watched and managed every few minutes. Confidence, real confidence, isn't loud about this. It doesn't need to keep proving the dough is rising by lifting the towel. It trusts the warmth it can't see because it already did the part that was actually its job, the mixing, the kneading, the decision to want this in the first place, and now understands that the rest of the work happens in a register quieter than effort. This is also, by the way, why so many people experience the strange timing that gets called a coincidence. The call that comes the week you finally stopped chasing, the opportunity that appears right after you stopped checking obsessively. It isn't magic arriving on cue. It's closer to what happens the moment the towel finally stays down long enough for the process underneath it to actually finish. The conditions don't change because something supernatural noticed you relaxed. They change because relaxing was the missing condition the whole time, and once it's finally present, whatever was already in motion gets the room it needed to complete. None of this means doing nothing. The baker still mixes the dough, still shapes the loaf, still puts it in the oven at the right time. There's a real difference between the stillness that lets something finish and the passivity that never started anything to begin with. The question that matters next is what it actually looks like to keep moving, keep showing up, keep taking the steps that are genuinely yours to take, without your hands creeping back toward the towel out of habit, out of fear, out of the old need to know it's working before it's done. That's a different kind of action than most people have ever been taught, and it starts with one distinction: most manifestation advice gets completely backwards. Here's the distinction, and it's a small one to say and a large one to live. Action driven by need says, "I have to do this, or something bad happens to me." Action driven by certainty says, "I'm doing this because it's the next right thing, and I already trust I'll be okay either way." From the outside, the two look identical. Same email sent, same call made, same step taken. The difference doesn't live in the action, it lives underneath it, in the state the action came from. Think of the simplest version of this. You send a text to someone who matters to you. One person hits send, sets the phone face down, and goes back to their evening. The message is out. That part is finished. Another person hits send and then can't put the phone down, watching for the little word that says it was read, refreshing the screen, drafting 3 backup replies in their head in case the first one was wrong. Same text, same words. 2 completely different states in the body that sent it. One of them is at peace. The other has quietly made their whole evening depend on an answer that hasn't come. Now picture an archer with a bow. She pulls the string all the way back, full effort, careful aim, everything she has. Then she opens her fingers and lets go. And here is the part that decides everything. The instant the arrow leaves the bow, it is completely out of her hands. She can't lean after it. She can't steer it through the air. She can't call it back to try again. Once it's released, the arrow belongs to the distance, not to her. A beginner hasn't learned this yet. She lets the arrow go and then tightens, leaning her whole body toward the target, straining as if she could still push the arrow the last few feet by wanting it hard enough. But the arrow is already gone. All that straining does is throw off her balance and ruin the next shot. The clean release, the one that actually flies true, happens on a calm breath, and then the archer simply lets the arrow be gone. She trusts the aim she already took. She doesn't chase what already left her hands. That is the whole lesson, and almost no one is ever taught it. You can do the drawing, you can do the aiming, you send the application, you make the call, you show up and take the step that is honestly yours to take. That's the draw. It's real, and it belongs to you. But there is always a moment right after where the thing leaves your hands, the message is sent, the words are said, the step is taken, and from that moment on, straining toward the result does nothing at all except throw you off balance. Refreshing the inbox for the 20th time is leaning after the arrow. Rewriting the same message 40 times because your piece depends on the answer is leaning after the arrow. The shot is already in the air. And notice what certainty actually is here, because it's easy to get wrong. Certainty is not knowing exactly where the arrow will land. The archer doesn't know that either. Nobody does. Certainty is trusting your own preparation enough that you don't need the ending promised to you in advance before you're willing to let go. You practiced, you showed up, you took the step. At some point, the only thing left is whether you can open your hand and let the arrow fly without your body still trying to control where it goes after it's already gone. This is exactly where people quietly trip themselves, and it has nothing to do with effort. It happens in the gap between sending the message and hearing back, between the interview and the answer, between doing the work and seeing the result. In that gap, there is nothing left to physically do, and yet the mind refuses to go quiet. It starts narrating. What if it doesn't work? What if I missed something? What if I should have said it differently? That narration is a grip too, not a hand on the bow this time, but a hand clamped around your own mind. And it can knock you off balance just as badly as leaning after the arrow ever could. What that voice actually is, why it shows up in the exact gap between effort and outcome, and what to do with it instead of fighting it. That's the next thing to see clearly, because a mind arguing against the very thing you want is a completely different problem than the wanting itself. Picture a tug of war where both teams are exactly evenly matched. From a distance, it looks like nothing is happening. The rope barely moves, but up close, Every person on both sides is straining with everything they have, sweating, gripping, leaning back with their full weight. Enormous effort, completely cancelled out, producing almost no movement at all. That's not peace. That's a standstill that costs just as much energy as a battle that's actually being won. This is what's happening inside anyone who says they want something and then spends their day contradicting it. One part of you is pulling toward the desire, saying it out loud, writing it down, picturing it. And on the other end of the same rope, a second voice is pulling just as hard in the opposite direction. When is this actually going to happen? What if it doesn't? Why hasn't it come yet? Maybe I'm doing something wrong. That voice isn't quiet, and it isn't weak. It's pulling with real force, often more force than the wanting itself, because it's usually older, built from every time something similar didn't work out before. The common advice here gets one thing badly wrong. It tells people to simply think more positively, repeat the affirmation harder, drown the doubt out with enough forced enthusiasm. But that's just adding a third team to the same rope, pulling even harder on the desire's side. The rope still doesn't move much because you haven't loosened anyone's grip. You've just escalated the standoff. This is why so many people who've said their affirmations every single morning for months still feel, underneath it, exactly as anxious as before. The affirmation was pulling hard. The doubt was pulling just as hard back. Nothing actually released. The doubting voice isn't the enemy here, even though it feels like one. It formed for a reason, usually protecting you from a disappointment that already happened once, trying to make sure you never get blindsided by hope again the way you were back then. Fighting it head-on doesn't get it to let go of the rope. It tends to grip tighter, the way anything does when it feels like it's under attack. What actually loosens a grip like that isn't force, it's evidence repeated calmly over time that the danger it's bracing for isn't happening right now, in this moment, today. So here's something worth trying that has nothing to do with silencing the thought. Next time it shows up, what if this doesn't work? Instead of arguing with it or trying to override it with something louder and more positive, just notice it the way you'd notice an old friend who keeps bringing up the same worry. There's that thought again. It's trying to protect me from being disappointed like I was before. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to fight it either. You just stop adding force to either side of the rope for a moment and let your attention settle somewhere else. Your breath, the room you're actually sitting in, the next small thing in front of you. The rope doesn't need a winner declared. It needs both sides to stop pulling at the same time. This is closer to how the brain actually changes than any single argument ever is. It isn't convinced by one good comeback to a fearful thought. It updates the way it updates anything, through repetition, through enough calm moments stacked one after another that the nervous system slowly stops treating the old worry as urgent. You won't talk the doubting voice out of existence in one sitting, and you don't need to. You just need it to stop being the loudest voice pulling on the rope, one untensed moment at a time. Here's a question worth sitting with honestly. When you picture the thing you want most right now, is your very next thought reaching toward it, or already bracing for why it might not come? Almost no one has ever actually noticed which one runs first. It happens in under a second, and it's running the whole tug of war without anyone realizing there was a rope at all. Once that grip starts to loosen, even slightly, even imperfectly. Something has to be true on the other side for anything to actually get through. And that's the last piece of this, the part almost nobody talks about because it has nothing to do with effort at all. Imagine you finally order the couch. You picked it out carefully, waited weeks for it, and now the delivery truck is outside, right on schedule. Everything about getting it to you worked perfectly, but when the movers carry it to your door, they stop because there's nowhere to set it down. The old recliner nobody has sat in for 2 years is still wedged in the corner. Boxes from a project you gave up on are stacked against the wall. Every surface that could hold something new is already holding something old that isn't even being used. The movers look at each other, apologize, and carry the couch back to the truck to try another day. The couch arrived. There was simply nowhere to receive it. This is closer to what's happening inside a person who keeps saying nothing is coming when the truth is quieter. Something keeps showing up, and there's no clear space inside to take delivery of it. The opportunity, the good idea, the small opening that would have been obvious on a calmer day. It circles back again and again, the way that truck circles the block, looking for somewhere to unload. But the inner rooms are still full of the same worry replayed for the 100th time, full of an old grievance parked in a corner it doesn't need anymore, full of the anxious checking sitting right in the middle of the floor, exactly where something new would need to land. And this is the same thing every image in this video has quietly been about: loosening the grip on the hose, keeping the surgeon's hand steady instead of shaking, resting in the state before the result instead of chasing the result, staying still instead of thrashing, trusting the dough under the towel, letting the arrow go without leaning after it, setting down one end of the rope. Every single one of those, underneath the different pictures, is the same motion, clearing a section of floor that was packed with old furniture, so the new thing has somewhere to land when it comes. If you've stayed with me all the way to here, I want to ask you something simple. Subscribe to this channel and come back tomorrow. This kind of change doesn't arrive in one video. It settles the way the dough rises, a little at a time, quietly, when you stop lifting the towel. And if you're the kind of person who's been doing this work with no noise around it, showing up, softening your grip, clearing your own floor an inch at a time, rarely told you're doing anything right, then you're exactly who I had in mind while making this. You're further along than you've been giving yourself credit for. Now stay with the open floor for one more moment, because this is where the quiet things finally get noticed. The message that lands at just the right time. The conversation that turns out to matter more than it seemed. The idea that surfaces in the shower instead of getting buried under 5 worries, fighting for the same 5 seconds of attention. None of that needs anything mystical to be true. A crowded room simply can't register a new arrival the way an open one can. When your attention isn't spent guarding the same old furniture, it finally has room to notice what's actually walking through the door. So here's a question worth sitting with honestly, the same way the rope question asked something of you. What has actually been taking up your floor space lately? Not what you want, you already know that. What's been parked there instead, out of habit, that you stopped even seeing as furniture at all? You don't have to empty the whole house in one afternoon. Nobody clears a living room in a single pass. But every time you let your jaw unclench, every time you let a worry pass without grabbing the rope, every time you let the dough rise without lifting the towel, you carry one more box out of the corner. You don't need an empty house. You only need enough clear floor for the next thing to be set down when it arrives, and it's likely already circling the block more than once, waiting for room. You didn't come here to learn one more technique to add to a list. If anything, you came here to put a few things down. Somewhere in the last few minutes, you let your jaw unclench once. Maybe your shoulders dropped half an inch without you deciding to do it on purpose. That was the whole demonstration, happening quietly inside you while you were busy following the words. The hose was never missing water. The dough was never failing to rise. The thing you want was never actually far away. It was circling back again and again, the way that delivery truck circles the block, looking for a clear place to set something down. Relaxing was never going to make every single thing you've ever wanted appear by tomorrow morning. That promise would be a different kind of lie, and you've heard enough of those already. What's true and quieter and far more useful is this. Almost everything you've been forcing, the checking, the gripping, the proving, the bracing, was the one condition standing between you and the very thing you were trying so hard to force into existence. You weren't missing effort, you were missing room. So if you've been carrying something for a long time, a desire you stopped saying out loud because it felt embarrassing to still want it this badly, a hope you've half buried under disappointment, a version of your life you can picture clearly but haven't let yourself believe in lately, let it stay exactly as alive as it's always been. You don't have to want it less. You only have to stop choking it on the way out. If this found you at the right moment, I'd genuinely love for you to stay around. Subscribe to the channel and come back, because this kind of shift rarely happens from one video. It happens the way the dough rises, a little at a time, undisturbed. If someone in your life has been gripping their own version of this too tightly, send this to them. Not as advice, just as something that might land the way it landed for you. And if you have a few seconds, leave a comment. Something true, not performed, about where you actually recognize yourself in this. Tell me what you'd want the next video to walk through with you. I read those, and they shape what gets made next. Before you go, do one more small thing. Notice your hand, wherever it's resting right now, on your phone, your lap, the arm of a chair. Notice whether it's holding on to anything, and if it is, just for a moment, let it open. That's all relaxing ever asked of you.